This week we're going to start DBQ on Alexander the Great. Now, we studied Alexander the Great last week, watched a video about him, and now we're going to write about him and determine just how great was Alexander the Great. And there you can see there is this a mosaic here that depicts Alexander the Great. The movie said he was really handsome, but I don't know, he doesn't look all that handsome to me, does he? But it's a mosaic, so we don't know how accurate it was. All right, maybe by their standards he was a real good looker, but anyway. So, everybody take a look at your overview paragraph. All right, and you guys follow along while I read it out loud. So everybody follow along right here, overview. Alexander III of Macedonia streaked like a meteor across the ancient world. That's a really nice simile, right? Streaked like a meteor across the ancient world. He shot across the sky and then he was gone, just like a meteor. When he was only 20, he inherited an empire that included the Kingdom of Macedonia and the city-states of Greece. Almost immediately, Alexander set out to conquer the Persian Empire, which stretched from Egypt to India. Let's underline that too. Persian Empire stretched from Egypt to India. He achieved his dream by the time he was 30. But he died just a few years later. In recent times, historians have debated Alexander's character and accomplishments. This mini-Q asks you to decide whether he deserves to be called Alexander the Great. So, was he really great? And how do you define great? Now, here's our list of documents. Document A is a map of Alexander's empire. Let me zoom in here for you. Document B is Alexander's battle against Porus. That's the movie we saw. Document C is the destruction of Tyre. I told some of you about the city of Tyre and how he destroyed them when they would not surrender. Document D is a couple of legends about the helmet and the hatband. And document E is a chart of some of the different things that are still affected by Alexander today, called Alexander's legacy. And you can line out document F, because I didn't include that one in this one. Okay? All right, now, everybody open their packet up. First, if you haven't yet, put your name up here. Name and period number. Okay, put your name. Don't write the word name, okay? Put your first and last name and whatever period number this is. Put it right there. Okay, once you get that done, we're going to open it up and take a look at the hook exercise on the inside. All right, everybody open it up. And it says, below is a list of 8 personal traits or characteristics. You have 2 tasks. Number 1, next to each trait, write the name of a person who has that trait and has used it to achieve greatness. The person may be a historical figure or someone who is alive today. So here's your 8 traits: courage, intelligence, creativity, leadership, a concern for others, discipline, and discipline means self-discipline. That means being able to do what you need to do no matter how tough it is. Okay, that's what discipline in this sense means. Being able to do what you need to do no matter how tough it is. Remarkable achievement. That's somebody who's achieved something remarkable. Right off the bat, I'm thinking about maybe Steve Jobs. Okay? He's achieved something remarkable with running Apple computers, Macintosh, the iPhones, and all that stuff. Now, he's dead now, but he would come to mind as somebody who had a remarkable achievement. And then integrity. And integrity, there's a note down here that means standing up for what you believe in. So integrity means being honest all the time, no matter what. Okay, so first thing you do is think of some people in history, or who's even alive today, who have these and who has achieved something great. Okay, they have to have achieved something great. So there's probably now to be somebody relatively famous to go in there. So take a few minutes and fill in some of those achievements. Okay? So pause it there and work on that. Okay, now, task 2. Select 3 traits from the list that you believe a person must have to be considered great, and be ready to discuss your choices. So out of these 8 traits, not the people you selected, but out of the 8 traits, courage, intelligence, creativity, leadership, concern, discipline, remarkable achievement, or integrity, which ones are the top 3? Which are the 3 that you think somebody has to have in order to be considered great? Okay? Take a moment and fill those 3 in. And then we'll talk about it. Okay? Now let's start on the background essay. No, let's not. Before we do the background essay, actually, I want you to skip that page and go to the back of the background essay. Open it up to page 247 at the bottom. And take a look at this timeline right here. Now the timeline starts with 449 BCE. Now remember, BC and BCE are the same thing. It means BC is before Christ, BCE means before Common Era. But the Common Era begins at the time of Christ. So it's essentially the same thing, BC, BCE. It all means before the time of Christ. So 449 BCE, 43-year-old war between Persia and Greek city-states ends. Okay, so that is, remember, that's our Persian Wars. Everybody squeeze the word Persian Wars. Now you need to be super tight because we're going to put a few things in here. So be as tight as you possibly can. Persian Wars. Now, notice, then we jump to 359 BC. That's 90 years. Does anybody remember what war happened after the Persian War but before Philip II? Hands up. What war was that? Right. That was the Peloponnesian War between Sparta and Athens. So that's right. Peloponnesian War right there. And we're going to put a little arrow right there. Okay. And that was Athens and Sparta. Okay, now 359, Philip II becomes king of Macedonia. 336, Philip II is assassinated. So that's roughly 25 years there, 360 to 335. That's about 25 years. Philip is assassinated. His son Alexander inherits the throne. Darius III becomes great king of Persia. Now that's happening at the same time Philip is assassinated. Remember, Macedonia is way over by Greece and Persia is way out near Babylon. 331 BC, Alexander defeats the Persian army at Gaugamela. And right here, let's put here, and becomes king of Persia. So this is Alexander. Becomes king of Persia. Alexander defeats the Persian army at Gaugamela and becomes king of Persia. 329, Alexander and his army reach western India, defeat Porus. And we're going to read more about that battle. But you should know about that from the movie last week if you were here. 323, Alexander dies in Babylon. And 301, at the Battle of Ipsus, Alexander's generals fight to divide his empire into 3 kingdoms. Okay? Now, let's take a moment and put some definitions next to these words. Legend, Macedonia, Phalanx, Asia Minor, and garrison towns. Okay? Now, a legend. This one's kind of long. A legend is a story that may be based on fact, but has been exaggerated. when parts are not believable. It's like the great fish story. Every time I tell it, my fish gets larger and larger. Macedonia, area north of Greece. Let's try to get that focused for you a little bit better. All right. Phalanx, fighting formation. Asia Minor, region of Asia closest to Greece. And garrison towns are towns where soldiers remained to control the local people and help supply the army. Okay? So take a minute and get those, and then we're going to read the background essay. Okay? Let's go back, let's go back one page here to the background essay. How great was Alexander the Great? All right, that's about right there. Okay, now remember, when we're doing an essay, the first thing we want to do is number our paragraphs. So let's number them. When we study, that's paragraph 1. During Alexander's boyhood, paragraph 2. Alexander was eager, paragraph 3. At the time, paragraph 4. We go up here. Instead of being satisfied, that's paragraph 5, and I'm going to put my numbers out here to the right. Alexander returned is paragraph 6. Alexander's push is paragraph 7. Flash forward is paragraph 8. And our picture is number 9. All right. So let's begin. You guys follow along while I read. When we studied the life of Alexander, hold on a second. Let me get this. When we study the life of Alexander of Macedonia, we begin with a truth and a problem. The truth is that Alexander is one of the most famous people in history. The problem is that what we know about him is a mixture of fact and legend. We do know that he was born in 356 BCE, more than 300 years before Jesus of Nazareth, in a kingdom on the edge of northern Greece called Macedonia. So let's underline part of that. We do know that he was born in 356 BC, more than 300 years before Jesus of Nazareth. His father, King Philip of Macedonia, and his mother, Olympia, prepared Alexander for kingship by hiring the philosopher Aristotle to teach him academic subjects, politics, sports, and warfare. Let's underline that. His father, King Philip of Macedonia, and his mother, Olympia, prepared Alexander for kingship by hiring the philosopher Aristotle to teach him academic subjects, politics, sports, and warfare. Now, what does that sound like? Does that sound Athenian or Spartan to you? Hands up. That's right. It is Spartan. Athenian. It's Athenian. With a start like this, Alexander developed a rather high opinion of himself, including the growing belief that he himself was a god. Okay, and we're going to underline that too. Alexander developed a rather high opinion of himself, including the growing belief that he himself was a god. Paragraph 2. During Alexander's boyhood, his father built the Macedonian army into a deadly fighting machine. First, Philip used his army and the frightening Macedonian phalanx to conquer nearby city-states. Next, Philip planned to attack the huge Persian Empire. Okay, so let's underline that. First, Philip used his army and frightening Macedonian phalanx to conquer nearby Greek city-states. Next, Philip planned to attack the huge Persian Empire. Paragraph 3. Alexander was eager to lead the attack himself. He would soon get his chance. Philip was assassinated in 336 BCE, and at the age of 20, Alexander inherited his father's kingdom and set out with the army to conquer Persia. Now, what does assassinated mean? It means killed. And then here, at the age of 20, Alexander inherited his father's kingdom and set out with the army to conquer Persia. At the time, Persia was probably the most powerful kingdom in the world. This mattered little to Alexander. Now, what is this? This mattered little to Alexander. What mattered little? The fact that Persia was the most powerful kingdom in the world. That's what didn't matter to Alexander. He didn't care. He was going for it. Using his disciplined cavalry and infantry in bold ways, Alexander fought his way through lands controlled by Persia, across Asia Minor, down the Mediterranean coast, into Egypt, and then east to Mesopotamia. There, he defeated a huge Persian army at Gaugamela. Where? Where did he defeat the army? In Mesopotamia. That's what they're there. So he's in Mesopotamia. There, Mesopotamia, he defeated a huge Persian army at Gaugamela. The Persian king Darius was killed in the aftermath, and Alexander replaced him on the throne. We want to underline that. The Persian king Darius was killed in the aftermath, and Alexander replaced him on the throne. All right? Paragraph 5. Instead of being satisfied with his expanded empire, Alexander pushed further eastward into lands no Greek had ever seen. He led his troops across Central Asia, fighting battles and establishing garrison towns along the way. More than once, Alexander was at the front of an attack. Let's underline that. More than once, Alexander was in the front of attack. And remember, a garrison town is where he leaves a small group, not a small tiny group, but a group of soldiers. He leaves them in a town, and they control the local population to make sure that nobody rebels. And they can also help provide food up towards the front lines of the battle for Alexander's army. Finally, at the Indus River in western India, Alexander was stopped. Not by an enemy, but by his own army, which refused to go further. After 8 years of combat and conquest, Alexander reluctantly turned back. All right, so we're going to underline that. After 8 years of combat and conquest, Alexander reluctantly turned back. And what does reluctantly mean? Reluctantly means he didn't want to, but he did it anyway. He didn't really want to turn back. He reluctantly turned back. Alexander returned to the Persian city of Susa, where he tried to unify his huge empire by taking Darius's daughter as his second wife and ordering his officers to marry Persian women. Many Macedonians resented Alexander's attempts to join the two races. Okay? So we got two different kinds of people here, and he wants his officers to marry Macedonian or marry Persian women. Resented means what? They didn't like the idea. They didn't like the idea. They might have even been a little bit insulted by that idea of having to marry a woman from a different race as their own. Alexander's push to expand his empire took its toll. What does that mean, took its toll? That means it had a price. It had a price. Over the years, he had suffered severe wounds that weakened his health. In June of 323 BCE, after a bout of heavy feasting and celebrating, Alexander became ill. 10 days later, he was dead. Ooh, let's underline that. After, and the word a and B-O-U-T means a time of. Let's just replace that. After a time of heavy feasting and celebrating, he was partying, Alexander became ill. 10 days later, he was dead. Now, the guy in the movie said that he probably had malaria, and I did some reading, and that also agreed that he probably had malaria. Okay, so he didn't drink himself to death. For reasons that are unclear, here we go. For reasons that are unclear, he had not named an heir. What's an heir? Heir is someone to take his place. Someone to take his place. Someone to take his place. After much fighting, Alexander's generals split up the land. More quickly than it took to build the empire, it began to fall into pieces. Flash forward 3 centuries. So now flash forward 300 years. Okay, so 300 years later, a Roman military commander named Julius Caesar is on a campaign in Spain. All right? And there he encounters, he sees, he finds, he comes upon a statue of Alexander and is said to have wept. That means he cried when he came to that statue. Caesar was reportedly overcome by the thought that Alexander had achieved so much at such a young age that it made him cry, it made him weep. He had that much respect, and he was moved by the thought that this man had been so young and yet he had accomplished so much. Basically what? He single-handedly conquered the entire Persian Empire, right? But did Alexander deserve Caesar's tears and respect? Examine the following documents and answer the questions. How great was Alexander the Great? Okay? Now, let's flip over here real quick and take a look at these questions right here. Would Alexander have heard of Jesus? Yes or no, and how do you know? That's a simple question. Take a look at the dates. I want you guys to take about 2 or 3 minutes and answer questions 1 through 6. Okay? So do that now. Okay? All right. Now, okay, that's good enough.